My name's Cameron, and I'm a new employee at the Hanford site for the Department of Energy, and recently graduated college from Utah State University, and I've got a videographer along with me to go through a ride of discovery and understanding what Hanford is from several different perspectives.
Do you have any childhood memories about hearing about Hanford or anything?
I never heard about Hanford. I actually called it Hanover once I was potentially offered the job or started learning more about it, and I was telling all my friends that it was Hanover.
No, Matt Sailor, sorry to say.
Then I had to go back and tell them that it was all actually Hanford, because by that time they were saying, "Oh, when are you going to Hanover?" My dad and everybody, so never really heard about it.
At Hanford, Washington, another impossible project proved possible when a huge plant was built for the mass production of the artificial element plutonium. This process involves what may be called the furnace of atomic energy, the reactor pile.
Alright, so where are we going?
Going to B reactor. They tell me that this is the first full-scale nuclear reactor that was made in the world. And something about it being the same designation as the Alamo. It's that important, that historic. So we're going to find out why it's so historic.
There were so many things waiting to be done.
There's a lot of fences around it.
Haven't held for a while now.
Well, the Department of Energy has recognized that B reactor is unique. It's the first full-size reactor in the world, the first one capable of producing anything. There was a test reactor in Chicago, and then the 1/10 scale reactor at Oak Ridge. They were too small to produce products. They proved the principles of operation, but they couldn't produce a product. So this is the first production reactor of any kind. This is the brains of the operation. The action center, the physical, muscular center of operation is in the front room, but this is the brains of the operation. This is what's behind the gauge. It's a little dial, and it's set. And if the water pressure varied by more than 10 pounds per square inch, that meant there was some kind of a blockage in the tube. The water wasn't getting through, and that was the worst possible scenario. So if this varied by more than 10 pounds, it would shut down the reactor. And every single one was capable of shutting down the entire reactor.
So what was the water used for exactly?
The water cooled the uranium fuel. The reactor's fuel is metal uranium. During the nuclear reaction, it gets very hot. It gets up to the range of many thousands of degrees. And you have to carry that heat away, and the simplest way was simply to carry it off physically with cold water, just a heat transfer system.
And that came from the Columbia River?
Yes, it did.
So this is a safety mechanism?
These were raised up toward almost to the ceiling, and there were hydraulic cylinders beneath them, and then each one contains like 45 tons of river rock. If the power went out, which it did on one occasion, totally interrupted the power, there's an electric clutch that would of course fail with no power, and they would slam down, and the hydraulic energy would drive in the control rods and shut down the reactor.
And you said one time it was used?
One time, a Japanese barrage balloon, which was incendiary, floated over, cut a power line. Power went out for about 1 second. But these deployed, and the reactors were down for about 3 days.
Wow. It's going to be my word of the day is wow. That seems like a pretty interesting dynamic, is that, I mean, what was done here was very historic, very scientific, but there were some repercussions with what happened here as well too. Do the people that come and visit, are they kind of pro the science that happened here? Do they concentrate on some of the negative aspects, or both?
We have every type of visitor. What I tell visitors is, you will form your own opinions, and we want you to do that. But I will convince you that the engineering was miraculous.
The very day I'm gonna feel the loved one again. Ask for a ride, should be traveling alone.
What was generated? What's the waste legacy from B reactor?
Well, a reactor doesn't generate anything like tank waste. A reactor generates contaminated water, and the water did flow into holding basins and then into the Columbia River. It did create some contamination. It did heat up the river very, very slightly. And solid waste, mechanical parts that failed, were buried in the soil near here. They have to be dug up. They have to be remediated. And so we are paying, still paying for the cost of operation today. Now, the river has cleansed itself, but we still have to deal with contaminated soil and groundwater.
We're about to see Paul Vinther. Paul was actually a worker who worked at Hanford during the 50s and up and through the 80s, and he's got a lot of stories he wants to share with us. Come along. So if someone comes to you, maybe on the street or somewhere else, and they say, hey, I don't know a lot about Hanford, maybe I've lived here my whole life, but I don't know a lot. What do they need to know about Hanford?
Well, it was developed at a time when the nation needed it. You had Hitler in Europe, who was threatening to dominate the world. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and it was threatening also. I know a lot of people have been asked, how could you work with plutonium to kill so many people, or this sort of thing? Well, it was a different time then. You were fighting for your life also here.
So what, going there and being around these people and knowing what you were working on, what was the atmosphere like? What was the feeling like?
There was very strong loyalty to both what we were doing and to the AEC at the time who was operating the site. Very strong, loyal employees. They felt they were doing a real important job.
There's still a lot of secrecy, or you can't tell.
There was secrecy, and that was part of the problem. Of course, when I came here, they knew what we knew what we were making. We weren't making bombs; we were just making plutonium, and we would send that plutonium off and to somebody else, and they would make the bombs and this sort of thing.
So I'm curious. You were there for 38 years. You kind of saw the end of the Cold War, and now Hanford's more in of a cleanup mode, cleaning up what's left over. What are your feelings of seeing all of that as a worker there, and now as it transitions to cleanup?
I think it's important to clean up. I worked at N Reactor for about 4 years, operations manager there. It was a fantastic plant, wonderful plant. And to see him now blowing it up and taking it down is kind of hit you.
Yeah.
but you understand it. You understand what's happening.
So where are we going today?
We're headed to talk to the Nez Perce tribe. We're going to talk with Horace Axtell, who is a tribal elder for the Nez Perce, and also Gabe Bondi, who is one of the directors of one of the programs that the tribes have, where they work with the Department of Energy.
He met us well, like he was speaking. He was see where Kuspama, him, a kinki, pitki, noon, Kakwisi, Mata, Kina, in Pukini, that's Nick Kimia. So I said, in this big river, all the different kinds of fish come this way, and they go up these small rivers and small creeks to generate or raise more fish, and that's what's important to us because it kept our people alive in the past.
Can you tell me the importance of the Columbia River to the Nez Perce?
The Columbia is the lifeblood. It's the waterway that provides that all our other waterways and the tributaries in the Northwest run into and flow out to the Pacific, which then, the Pacific offers the salmon that come up the river and is our main nutrient behind water that we take into our bodies in a traditional sense. So here at Hanford, the local tribes' mission is to protect those resources as we near cleanup and look at the future of the Hanford site, the long-term stewardship issues, and making sure that we plan effectively to cohabitate the areas and co-utilize the resources out there, that we protect them for everyone, and that we're respectful of our past as well as our future.
And so, with looking ahead to the future, what's the hope that the Nez Perce tribe has for the Hanford site?
Our hope is to be able to come back to the site and practice our traditional ways and out on the site, rekindle those ties and trade routes that did occur, and maybe hopefully someday have a gathering that can occur with all the tribes out on site. The challenges at Hanford are very complex and are going to take some time to fully understand what the effects of the contamination are, and it'd always be a challenge, and there'll always be barriers to how effective the cleanup can occur. So our challenge as a tribe is to educate our youth and to get involved in this very tough arena that's not very highlighted in the public eye.
First of all, Dave, what is Hanford? It's a lot of different things to different people. What is Hanford to you, and what is Hanford in general?
Well, Hanford's history. It's a lot of history. It goes back to a town site that I think that was founded sometime in the mid to late 1800s. It then was the name that was used to describe a large area of over 600 and some square miles that was set aside to produce plutonium as part of the Manhattan Project. So it really just describes an area here in central Washington that has been used for many things. It was most recently it was a site of plutonium production. It was a large, very complex nuclear industrial facility with 50 miles of the Columbia River running through it.
So what are the challenges associated with your job?
Well, first, it's an extremely large site. It's spread out. The hydrodynamics of the site, dealing with the groundwater, are very complex, and understanding those, along with, we don't know where all of the waste sites are. We think we have a pretty good handle on it that can contaminate the groundwater. The waste sites were characterized, but not 100%, and we find surprises every day. We're dealing in a very hazardous environment, not only from chemicals and the nuclear part, the radiological part, but it is in the middle of a desert, and there's extreme temperatures, both cold and hot. We have the wind. A lot of the work is outdoors, so there's a lot of different elements that factor in, and the one thing we are committed to is to keep our people safe.
Why is there so much tank waste on site?
Well, plutonium production operations went on for a good number of years, and is part of the process of separating the plutonium out. There was the waste that was generated, and the decision was made to store that in underground tanks. So there's a lot of waste generated, and that's where it was stored.
From the time of that first explosion until Hiroshima shuddered beneath the release of atomic energy, work on the bomb went steadily forward in closely guarded plants in New Mexico, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington.
So my understanding that your connection to Hanford is both professional and personal. Can you explain about that?
Yeah, it's fortuitous. My mother is from Nagasaki, Japan, and the material that was made for the plutonium that went into the atomic bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki was produced here at Hanford back in the 1940s. I am in charge of the 53 million gallons of tank waste. That's the legacy from the Cold War. And we're in charge of retrieving, treating, and then immobilizing that tank waste eventually into glass for long-term storage. The waste treatment plant is kind of the cornerstone of the treatment of the tank waste here at Hanford. And Bechtel National is building that waste treatment plant project. Our river protection project is about a $62 billion project just to do the tank waste, and it goes out to 2047, and then building the waste treatment plant is $12.3 billion, and that will go operational in the 2019 time period. So it's a huge project overall. It's the critical path for Hanford's cleanup.
So what is the tri-party agreement? Who does it involve, and how does it govern cleanup?
Okay, that's a good question. The tri-party agreement is between three parties: the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Energy, and then the State Department of Ecology. And it was established in 1989, so for the past 20 years, the tri-party agreement, or we call it the TPA, is really the commitments that the government has made to the other agencies and the public.
Now, Todd, can you talk to us a little bit about what Washington Closure Hanford does?
Yeah, Washington Closure Hanford manages the River Corridor Closure Project. It's a $2.1 billion project, runs through 2015, September 2015. Our job is to tear down contaminated buildings and clean up contaminated waste sites that are located along the Columbia River. We have about 1,100 employees and subcontract employees, and their jobs are to clean up waste sites, to tear down contaminated buildings, and to operate the environmental restoration disposal facility. Most of our work is done along the river where the reactors were located and where the fuel was manufactured for those reactors. There's waste sites located there, there are buildings there, and those are the things that we're tearing down, cleaning up, and moving that stuff, contaminated material, into the environmental restoration disposal facility in the central part of the site, which is where all of that material goes. We've done well over 100 building demolitions to date, and hundreds of thousands, millions of tons of material removed from waste sites. Our drivers, for example, that haul the waste around, just did their 1 millionth mile without an accident, and in fact they've driven probably at this point over 13 million miles with only one accident, which is an outstanding record. I mean, those are the kind of accomplishments that we look at and hope they can continue, obviously, and to do them safely.
What have you learned through this experience of filming?
I learned that things don't always go as planned, and that happens anywhere in the world, I'm assuming. But it's it's been good to just roll with it and understand that you have certain canvas to work with and certain messages that people give you, and it's been fun. It's been a little bit of stress and anxiety, but I think it's a positive anxiety. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing at Hanford right now?
I think the biggest cleanup challenges at Hanford are the 50 million gallons of highly radioactive waste that's in the 177 tanks at Hanford. And about a third of the single shell tanks at Hanford, 70 or so, have leaked in the past. So getting that waste out of the tanks and treated is the biggest goal.
With that, there's a lot of challenges, but I've also heard some good things with regard to cleanup. So what are those good things we're hearing?
Well, I think we'd all say the river corridor cleanup is a big success. To date, we've overseen the movement of over 60% of the contaminated soil and debris from the river corridor up to the environmental restoration disposal facility. So you can say we're more than halfway done, so that's really encouraging. Well, Hanford's divided into three main areas. They're called by numbers, the 100, 200, and 300 area. And within the 586 square mile Hanford site, those are actually fairly small areas. The 100 area includes nuclear production reactors. They're all on the order of a square mile or 1.5 miles square, so they don't take up a whole lot of real estate. The 300 area is just a few hundred acres, and the core of the 200 area is about 10 square miles. So when you add that up, the most intensively used, most contaminated areas of Hanford are just perhaps 10 or 20 square miles. And there's a lot of open space where there is some contamination, as you would expect at any large industrial site, but a lot of the areas are fairly pristine.
I recently moved here, and I know some of the people might hear about Hanford and say, well, is it safe to live there? What's your response to those types of questions?
I think we all think that Tri-Cities is a great place to live. We live here, obviously, and you know, the Columbia River is really a national resource. It's recognized as such because it's part of the Hanford Reach National Monument. You know, I think people hear about Hanford and they're concerned about, you know, what's called the most contaminated site in North America. But the river's a great resource. You know, we sample the environment all the time, and you know, the river and a lot of resources around here are absolutely safe and available for the public to use. And we just want to make sure that the Hanford site, all of the Hanford site, gets back to that same status.
I'm here with Dennis Falk, the Hanford Program Manager for the EPA. And Dennis, what is the Environmental Protection Agency's mission?
Well, overall our mission is, of course, to protect the environment.
And what's the mission with respect to Hanford?
Well, Hanford, we're here as part of the Tri-Party Agreement. Our role is regulatory oversight. In essence, the Department of Energy here is responsible for the cleanup, and we oversee it to make sure it's done in order to protect human health and the environment. The cleanup has actually been ongoing for 20 years now. We just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Tri-Party Agreement, and we've made tremendous progress along the river, getting waste off the river and in a stable configuration up on the Central Plateau.
So, you being one of the regulators of Hanford, what are some of the challenges that you see on a day-to-day basis and even years down the road?
One of the things that is very difficult about Hanford is just its size. You know, it's enormous. We have over 1,800 waste sites that need cleaned up. We have over 80 square miles of contaminated groundwater that's above drinking water standards. So one of the big issues when you have a cleanup that spans many decades is just keeping focus, because again, it's with focus that we actually get projects completed.
I'm here with Susan Leckban, Chair of the Hanford Advisory Board. And Susan, can you tell us a little bit of what the Hanford Advisory Board is?
The Hanford Advisory Board consists of a group of varying interests who follow Hanford cleanup. It is a board of interest, and I'm saying that specifically because most of the other advisory boards are boards of individuals. This particular board was established to represent the interests involved. As an example, Physicians for Social Responsibility have a seat on the board. There are many local government seats, and those entities choose their member to be on the board.
Okay, and why is it important to have the Hanford Advisory Board?
The Hanford Advisory Board provides the tri-party agencies with values from the interest groups and from citizens at large on Hanford decisions. There are huge amounts of money being spent here and huge environmental concerns, and these agencies listen to our board and really kind of consider us a sounding board.
What's the takeaway message for Hanford cleanup?
Well, what I want people to understand is we're getting a lot of work done. Every day out there, both from what we get with our normal budget and the Recovery Act money. The money's being put to good use. We are gaining on the groundwater and the contaminated waste sites. We will stop the contaminated water from entering the Columbia River within the next 4 to 5 years. It will be stopped. I just feel good progress is being made. There's an awful lot to do yet. There's years of it, but you got to understand, a lot of our highest risks have been eliminated out there.
The message that I take home is that there's a lot of different people coming together and working on a huge project, largest environmental cleanup in the world. And so just understanding that there has to be a science perspective, there has to be someone who comes in and says, well, this has tribal significance, or this technology is feasible, and the people that live here too, that this is in their backyard and they have an input and a say too. So it's a difficult task, it's a necessary task, and it's one that a lot of intelligent and helpful people are working and collaborating together on to get accomplished. That's kind of the take home. It's bigger than I ever would have thought.